Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
Hello, dear friends, and welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show, where we share innovative thoughts and explore deepening truth in support of the path to unity and enlightenment. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. This hour, we'll be looking at evolving into oneness. Many sources indicate that currently we're in the process of evolving from dogma, separatism, and polarization into non-duality, interconnectedness, and unity. There's no denying that things are undergoing more rapid shifts and changes than ever before in recorded history. Like comparing a still photograph to a motion picture, the faster things move, the more unified they become, and the more complete the story they tell, exposing ever-deepening levels of truth. What does this mean for us as individuals and as a global community? What shifts and changes will be required of us in order to keep up with the times? What effect will deepening truths have on our belief systems, relationship to life and to each other? What will we experience as we transit from duality to interconnectedness to oneness? With us this hour to ponder these mysteries is Robert Atkinson, the author of 9 books, including the 2017 Nautilus Book Award winner, The Story of Our Time, From Duality to Interconnectedness to Oneness, Year of Living Deeply, a memoir of 1969, and Mystic Journey, Getting to the Heart of Your Soul's Story. Robert is an internationally recognized authority on life story interviewing, personal myth-making, and soul-making. He's a professor emeritus at the University of Southern Maine, director of StoryCommons, and a member of the Evolutionary Leaders Circle. His website, robertatkinson.net. Robert, thanks for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Thank you, Gwilda. It's a pleasure to be with you, especially on this during this World Interfaith Harmony Week.
It's a nice week to do this. You have a Ph.D. What is your major area of study, Robert?
Yeah, that's developmental psychology is where I ended up, but I did a few zigzags along the way. I majored in philosophy as an undergraduate. I had a master's degree in American folk culture and a second master's degree in counseling. And then my doctoral work was in cross-cultural human development or developmental psychology.
What university did you attend?
I started out at Southampton College of LIU, then went to the Cooperstown graduate program, part of the State University of New York system, then to the University of New Hampshire, and finally my doctoral work was at the University of Pennsylvania.
So what is personal myth-making?
Personal myth-making, yeah, that's a good one. That came from my work with Joseph Campbell. I met him in 1970 when I attended one of his Cooper Union talks. And at that time, I was kind of living what I was sitting in the Great Hall listening to him talk about. And I didn't realize it really at the time, but I was living my own personal myth as he was describing it. And it's about, it's really what he has written, his classic book about the hero of the thousand faces, or the journey of the hero. And so personal myth making is really about looking at our lives in the context of a universal pattern that takes us in terms of mythic archetypes. It takes us from separation to separation with what we're familiar with, to an unknown realm through a series of initiations. And then we return to either the same place or someplace new as a different person. So it's really, personal myth making is really about the process and living the pattern of transformation in our lives.
It sounds like a shamanic initiation, doesn't it?
It is very similar to that. Of course, that's where the middle part comes from. The initiation is definitely built on the same principles as the shamanic ceremonies and practices.
So what's the difference between myth making and soul making?
Yeah, another interesting one. One way there are a number of ways of looking at that. One way would be that when we tell or write our life story, or when we write our personal myth, what we're doing basically is looking at our life from pretty much from a birth to death perspective, or womb to tomb perspective. But when we get to the process of soul making, that really extends the whole time frame out from conception, or maybe even prior to conception, to throughout, not only including our entire whole life experience, but beyond, what happens to our soul as it goes on in its journey after our life on earth is completed. So soul making is really about putting our own life experience in the context of an eternal experience of the journey of the soul.
Do you believe we're in a process of an evolutionary leap at this time?
I sure do. And what's interesting about that, about where we are in that process, is that we're really in what I would think of as a spiritual springtime. In that, going to take a step back for a minute, every cycle, and really a step back from that, one of the interesting things about this whole way to understand the universe and reality is to think about and understand that there is an inherent harmony between science and spirituality or religion. And so, just interestingly, 3 years ago, one of the leading scientists wrote a paper in a leading journal called "What is the Most Astounding Fact in the Universe?" And his answer was that the entire universe, on all scales and all places and all times, obeys the same fundamental laws of nature. So this is really about understanding how all of the cycles that can be observed in nature are governed by the same principles, the same fundamental laws. So this includes things like the cycle of the seasons, and solar cycles, lunar cycles, as well as seasonal cycles. They all have their times of growth, decline, and renewal. And the interesting thing about that is that if reality is one, if there's one fundamental law of nature governing all things, then that would mean that the same has to be true of spiritual cycles or religion itself, because all things are governed by the one natural law. So that means that there have been also spiritual epics that have guided humanity's conscious evolution along a continuum of increasing complexity. And that's been also a process of maturation, followed by decline and eventual renewal.
So from what I hear you saying, we evolve and devolve in cyclic nature.
Mm-hmm, right. And so when we look at the cycles of spiritual epics that have happened throughout our history, that would include the cycles of the world's major prophets, from Krishna to Abraham to Moses, Zoroaster, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, and Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith in the mid-19th century. And each of those have had in their own time, have changed the course of human life over the last 4,000 years, bringing about a leap of consciousness with each new epoch they initiated. So spiritual epics take centuries before they reach their peak growth or their period of maturity. So that means right now we're only in a century and 3/4 into the most recent spiritual epoch, the Baha'i era. And so we're still in the springtime phase of its growth period.
That's pretty fascinating. So do we actually devolve spiritually then as well as evolve? or is it more of a spiral effect?
It's definitely a spiral effect. Yeah, I mean that's kind of the meaning of evolution is that the spiral of evolution itself progresses and evolves, even though, as you said, which is very important to remember, that each of those cycles includes within it a process of transformation. And we can talk more about that. That's another section in my book. But yeah, there is I mean, it could be seen as a evolution with, I'm not sure if I would use the word devolution, but but it is an evolutionary process with the pattern of transformation built into it, which includes experiences and moments and times during that whole period that in the moment appear to be devolutionary, but they're really essentially an integral part of that transformational process
Well, it looks like it's about time for us to take a short pause. Robert and I will be back on the other side of this commercial break. Don't you dare go away. You're listening to the Mission Evolution Radio Show. We're coming to you on the X Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net. We'll talk back soon. Welcome back. This is the Mission Evolution Radio Show. We're dedicated to unification and evolution of consciousness. To stay abreast of all the wonderful information and tools we have to offer, visit our website, missionevolution.org. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka, and our special guest this hour is Robert Atkinson. His website, robertatkinson.net. Robert, we were talking about the spiral effect of the evolutionary concept, but you were saying that everything is subject to the same laws of nature. And if we look at the seasons, you go winter, spring, summer, fall. No two are identical, but they tend to come and go. So things spring to life and then they die under the snow. How does that relate to spiritual evolution?
Yeah, it's really the same pattern that I mean, so when we look at the cycle of the seasons, that's the physical realm. When we look at the spiritual epics, that's the spiritual realm, and they reflect one another because they're part of the same reality. So the same thing that happens during the cycle of the seasons is also happening during each spiritual epic that we've had that I referred to earlier. And within that cycle, within that grand cycle of many centuries for each spiritual epic that we've had, it's a process of bringing about a transformation of the of society, and that's been different in each time in our history. We've actually gone through, if you go back to the earlier spiritual epics, the transformation was about creating unity in the family and then in the tribe. And then another spiritual epic was about creating unity in the city, state. Another spiritual epic was about creating unity in the nation. And now we're in a spiritual epic where the purpose of this one is about creating unity on a global scale. But in order to accomplish that, the process follows the same pattern in all of those cases, which is when you break down the pattern of transformation, I like to think of it just in three simple terms of beginning, muddle, and resolution. So there are times, and so that's true. I mean, that's also what a way to describe personal mythmaking that we were talking about earlier. And it's also the same way that collective mythmaking can be described. That's as true on the collective level as it is in the personal. So right now, we're going through a collective muddle, or what we might think of as the dark night of the collective soul, because we see muddles all around us popping up everywhere, and one here and one there, and they're
That seems almost like we're in winter rather than spring.
well. Okay, that's a good point, because winter takes us into spring, and because each spiritual epoch is designed to last and take many centuries, 8, 10, 12 centuries, to reach its fullness, its period of maturity, it can be a long time from that end of winter to a real to realize that it's a spring now. And so right now, only a century and 3/4 into this most recent one, we're still seeing signs of that winter. It's a process really of the breaking down of the old and the building up of the new happening at the same time. So we can see signs of the old order, the old way of seeing the world breaking down around us, while at the same time we can see signs of a new consciousness emerging. And so we're at a cusp, and we're in the midst of a shift from what I think of as a consciousness of duality, living by that, which we've done for many centuries. We're shifting now gradually toward living with a consciousness of oneness.
Would you mind describing what the consciousness of duality is and how it affects us?
Yeah, so it's an interesting, again, I like to look at this, and the book takes a big picture perspective on that whole process. And so when we go way back to the origin of human life here, the original indigenous peoples came into being with a consciousness of oneness. They understood that they were connected to the universe, and everything in the universe was interconnected with each other. Then as humanity started spreading out and settling the whole planet, other groups came into contact with each other, and that created conflict, and that's what brought about a shift to a consciousness of duality. And so during that time, for the last couple of millennia, really, there have been so many ways of that pairs and opposites appeared to be in conflict with each other. So you have light and dark and so many other forms of that same basic opposition. But the reality is they are just parts of a whole. And we're coming now into we're really reclaiming the original awareness humanity was born with, which is a consciousness of oneness, which sees the big picture as one, and even the pairs of opposites within it as a whole and as one. So it's a matter of shifting our perspective from the parts to the whole and seeing the whole as one.
So what are the scientific principles behind this evolutionary leap we're talking about?
The scientific principles. Well, that's an interesting one too. It kind of goes back to what I mentioned in the beginning, when a leading scientist just proclaimed 3 years ago that the most astonishing fact in the universe was that the entire universe obeys the same fundamental laws. So here's a scientist saying what many spiritual teachers have said for centuries. It's a sign of spirituality and religion coming together, showing that they are in harmony. And as time goes on, I mean, there's the whole area of quantum physics, where there are many quantum physicists are saying the same kind of thing about seeing the universe as one, and as well as a reality as one. So there's a merging of science and reality in those ways. Science is now really confirming many of the spiritual principles that have been around for centuries and are coming into sharper focus right now in our time.
Was the Mayan calendar and the horoscope um, put together based on these laws of nature that we're talking about?
How could they not have been? I mean, if they worked for what they were designed to do by the Mayans and other peoples that used those kinds of calendars, they wouldn't have kept them. They wouldn't have kept using them for so long, for centuries, if they didn't work, and they wouldn't work unless they were in harmony with the universal laws of nature. So yeah, they were able to be, those laws were able to be discerned from observation and participation in those laws by living in harmony with the universe around us. And that's the only way it could be for them to be effective and useful.
Yeah, they're pretty amazing. And it's like they didn't even have so much as a telescope. So, how did they align with the movement of the universe and do a calendar that was so accurate?
Yeah, I'm sure there are other people who could answer that more effectively than I. But the thing is, they had what some people would call primitive tools for discerning that and accomplishing what they did with what they had. But they were really no different than the kinds of tools we have now in our time to do the same thing, only more, maybe a little more precisely or more through the use of technology. It was the same thing has been possible at all times in our history.
So from what you're saying, they had the ability to align with the natural law. And now you're also saying that we're evolving to a place where we might have the ability to align with natural law. How's that working?
Well, it's working interestingly because, as I mentioned a bit ago, it's all happening as part of a dual process, a process of breaking down and a process of building up. So sometimes we get lost in the breaking down parts or the parts that are breaking down. We get, it's either hard to let go of what we know so well for so long, but at the same time, there are many more people now recognizing that there is a building up process happening, and there is really what I talk in the book about is a global movement unfolding in our time right now, which is really a movement of movements, and it's a network of networks and organizations and groups and people who are coming together from many different places and perspectives, who are all working on some piece of this greater whole.
Well, I would like to talk about our participating in this movement on the other side of a commercial break. Robert and I will return to our discussion. You stay right there. This is Mission Evolution Radio Show. We're coming to you on the X Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net. Welcome back. This is the Mission Evolution Radio Show, missionevolution.org, bringing leading-edge information supporting the path to enlightenment. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka, and we're speaking with Robert Atkinson. His website, robertatkinson.net. Robert, we were talking about the cyclic nature of tearing down and building back up. And then you went into speaking about how there's different groups and everything, working along with this. How important is our individual participation in this?
It's vital. I mean, it's the transformation that is in process, the global transformation that is in process is not going to happen unless we all get involved and understand what it's about, and not only flow with it but help it to happen. I like the to use the metaphor, that we're all midwives of this process of planetary rebirth. And so we all have to learn how to become the midwives that are needed for this rebirth of consciousness now that is underway. And it's essential. I mean, there's been the promise of world peace or peace on earth within every spiritual tradition throughout time. And interestingly, each time the people at that time had the tools, the spiritual tools to use to bring that out, to bring it about, to make it a reality. And that's just as true today. We have the spiritual tools and principles and values to make peace on earth happen. But it's not going to happen without us, without each individual playing our role in making that happen.
So are you telling me that the laws of nature are just an influence and then we have to do our part?
Exactly. Yeah. When it comes to the human community and the human family coming together as one human family, it's up to us to make that happen. It's not going to happen without us. I mean, if there are, we can see both of the breaking down and the building up process happening in many ways all around us all the time. And if the people who are part of the holding on to the old aren't going to let go, it's going to be more difficult. It's going to take longer. So it's about the major shift that's really happening now in terms of the global transformation is a shift from a consciousness of duality, where we've gotten so complacent in dealing and living with and dealing with the conflicting opposites that are around us, and even making it more difficult to see beyond or those dualities or to bring them together. As long as that continues to happen, it's going to be really difficult for the others of us who see the need for and for our survival to bring about a consciousness of oneness. It's going to take longer, and that's the way it plays out. That's the nature of the pattern of transformation. It's there's struggle involved. There's not only conflict involved. There's deep struggle involved, and there's many civil rights songs about struggle involved.
Yeah. Is there a difference between duality and polarization?
It may depend on how you're using it, but basically, no. I mean, it really has to do with the way you see the world. And if you see dualities as polar opposites or as something that is needed to live with, then polarization, of course, is just as makes it just difficult to bring about a consciousness of oneness as living with a consciousness of duality would be. So yeah, they're pretty much the same thing. I mean, polarization and duality would both be eliminated and unnecessary when we are capable of, ready and willing to live with a consciousness of oneness.
Well, you say that the laws of nature, we're all moving in this direction, right? And so the physical laws all align with the laws of nature, as do the spiritual one, right? So far?
Right.
Okay, so on a physical level, even the functioning of our cells relies on duality or the polarization of positive and negative charge. How will that fit into this transition you're speaking of?
Yeah, the charge will be there. I mean, it's like, the Earth turns on its biomagnetic forces, and that's not going to change on the planetary level. And the charges are not going to be eliminated on the physical human level either. What's going to change about that, though, is that we will come to understand the purpose and the value of those opposing charges. I like that term. It's a good way to look at it because they are charges, and it's also really all about energy, the way we understand and use and work with and live with energy. So there can be a positive and negative charge, and there always will be, but they don't have to separate us in the way that everything seems to be creating separation in the world now, because that separation is an illusion. When we look at reality and understand reality as one, there can be that charge, and what we seem to think now is a negative charge between opposites will be totally reimagined and seen as a positive charge that can unite us. So it's also about the principle of unity and diversity. We're not bringing about a consciousness of oneness is not about eliminating differences. It's about integrating, honoring, and really preserving those differences that do exist within the human family. And when
so let me see if I've got this right. So what you're talking about is developing more mobility rather than just sitting on one side of the fence or the other.
Right. Mobility is another good way to look at it. I mean, that's kind of what's one of the things that's required in order to live with a consciousness of oneness, or what I refer to as seeing with the eye of oneness. Yeah, that requires the mobility to be able to shift from looking at the forest and seeing many trees to looking at the forest and seeing all trees as one. There's many other examples of that, but it's a matter of shifting our consciousness in a way that the parts become the whole. And in doing that, there's no negative energy or charging involved at all. It's all a charge toward wholeness and for wholeness, to see everything as an essential part of the whole. And so in terms of the human family, it's also about realizing how vital and how much more rich it really makes everything to be able to see all of humanity as a rich flower garden of many colors and varieties. So that enhances and enriches the human family as a whole, to see its variety and differences as a whole.
So what's the difference between interconnectedness and oneness?
Well, yeah, there's not much difference because they're both on the trajectory of evolutionary consciousness and where it's taking us. But one of the differences might be that we can get to a point where we can see that all things are interconnected and see that and maybe come to understand it. But getting to the point of oneness is a bit of a shift from interconnectedness, in that when we can not only see things through the eye of, or with the eye of oneness, that helps us. That's really what brings about the shift to a consciousness of oneness. So oneness is about living with that consciousness of oneness, and everything that we do in our lives being a response to that oneness. So interconnectedness is kind of a way of observing and seeing things, while oneness is a way of being and doing in the world because of that oneness.
So it's a matter of perspective.
Right. And that makes it, in some sense, relatively easy to make that shift of perspective if we get to the point of recognizing the interconnectedness of all things, it might then become much easier to make that what prior to that would have been a leap of consciousness, but now it could become, and because it is also an evolutionary process that can take time and be slow individually and or collectively. By the time we get to a recognition of the interconnectedness of all things, the shift to living in oneness because of that can be a subtle step.
Well, we're going to need to take another quick break. Robert and I will be back shortly, so don't leave us now. This is the Mission Evolution Radio Show on the X Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net. Welcome back. This is the Mission Evolution Radio Show, bringing together gifted people of service to the world. I'm your host, Gwilda Wiyaka. I always love to hear from my listeners. You can email me at info@missionevolution.org and suggest a topic or a guest that's on your mind, and I'm sure we'll all enjoy them. Our guest this hour is Robert Atkinson. His website, robertatkinson.net. Robert, we were just talking about, again, how things are breaking down and building at the same time. How long can we expect to have be picked up by the ankles and change rattled out of our pockets? How long does this process take?
Yeah, that's the key question, and nobody can really say in advance of when that's going to happen, but we can say that it could take as long as it takes to bring us to our knees collectively, or whatever other imagery you want to use to describe that point at which things will begin to, I mean, we've already passed the point at which things are beginning to turn around and to really make progress toward people becoming more aware of a consciousness of oneness and wanting to live within that. But we're at a point right now, I mean, today in history, when things, any day, any moment, any week or month could get a lot worse than they seem to be right now, or they could get a lot better at any point. And depending, it's going to come down to how effective all of the people and organizations and movements are in creating this mega movement of movements and network of networks toward oneness, to determine whether or not or when we're going to get to that to some breaking point where things will clearly turn around, or whether it's going to be a more gradual, gentle, step-by-step process of more and more people becoming, coming to this awareness of oneness and living this way. It could go either way. That's still totally up to us, the way it's going to play out.
Have humans ever undergone this transition before?
Yeah, and in different ways and different settings and times. So it's been different than it is for us now, because this is one of those times where there's so much more at stake now than there ever was before. I mean, there's so much at stake right now that it's really about our collective survival. And that's why it's so much more important now for us to take action as individuals and as a collective body to ensure that it is going to be a gentle birth rather than a catastrophic rebirth. That choice in that direction is still totally up to us, but it's never been like this exactly, in that we could, if it doesn't happen the way it's designed to, there have been other cycles, really, even before humanity came to Earth, where there were periods of renewal death and renewal, where it looked like, within species or other catastrophes that happened on the planet, that even though humanity wasn't there at the time, it could have been an end, but it wasn't. I mean, this is the incredible thing about nature. It's so resilient that there was always a renewal every time in the past when the planet came close to extinction. It didn't happen because of the resilience and the purpose of its creation in the first place. So
I've had anthropologists and geologists on the shows that have told me that because of the way the Earth renews herself, we could have been to this state of development and industrialization before, and it would have disappeared so much underneath the crust that there would be no evidence of it. Is it possible that we came to this place before and went down?
Well, that's a really interesting one. I mean, it depends how far back you go to look for that. If we went back more than 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, it could be possible that could be the case. But again, I think it would be very different on a very different scale than it is right now. Because if we go back beyond 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, when we have the beginning of what we think of as the beginning of world religions as we know them today, going back to Krishna and Moses and those which were 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago. But from that point on forward, we know the history pretty well. Before that, we don't as well. And it could have been possible, but it would have been on a totally different scale than it is possible right now, because we're in a time in our evolution where it's possible, the only time it's been possible, to bring about a global community with a consciousness of oneness. That might have been possible prior to 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, but it was only possible on a much smaller scale than it is today.
How do we know that if these cycles repeat? How do we know that?
Well, I think, and I'm not the scientist in that way, but I think when you go back, if we are talking about before 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, you'll see that those cultures, those civilizations that existed then were regional. They were not global, right?
Right. 4,000 or 5,000 years is not that far back, though.
Right, but 4,000 years ago would be the time of Krishna, the time of Moses, Abraham, and at that time, prior to that, every civilization that existed prior to that was only regional, at the largest. In many cases, more localized. I mean, that's the time of the Mayans in Peru and Mexico and so on, and they were only a small regional culture or civilization. Today, we have a global civilization.
How do you see the indigenous cultures as being important to the spiritual evolution of our day?
Yeah, that's really a key thing, because when, as I mentioned before, when indigenous peoples came into being, they had spiritual beliefs of an overarching interconnectedness that were not separate from any other of their daily actions or behaviors. So they lived every day, every moment, with an understanding of that interconnectedness. But over the millennia, as cultures spread out and interacted, that's when a consciousness of duality became pervasive. But now, as the world's people are all attempting to regain a sense of harmony and unity, indigenous cultures hold the missing link to knowing how to live with a consciousness of oneness. And that's why all of these movements that are happening today are happening with indigenous peoples at the forefront of these movements, and the movements of movements and the networks of networks. They all have indigenous peoples at the forefront because they do hold the missing link of knowing how to live with a consciousness of oneness, which is what we all, the rest of us, need to learn to live with now.
There's a lot of myths about how each indigenous tribe took a part of the truth, cast to the four corners of the world, and now's a time when that all comes back together. This kind of lines up, doesn't it?
It does, very much, yep. And so that's where the cycles of evolution come in as well. It's been a cyclical evolutionary process that is bringing us now to the point where the original indigenous peoples were when they first came to this planet.
Well, we have just a little bit of time left. Robert, I'd like to have you tell us, what can we as individuals do to assist this process? What's the most important thing we can do?
Well, there are a number of things. I mean, individually, I do have in the book a meditation on living in oneness, and that is something that can be done regularly. I also have, excuse me, on my website, I also have the Oneness Pledge, which is kind of like a mantra or another form of a daily practice that everyone can learn and bring into their regular practice. The Oneness Pledge goes like this: in all my thoughts and actions, I pledge to look on all things with the eye of oneness. And if that becomes a regular daily practice, then we do begin to see everything and look upon all things with the eye of oneness, which means that would eliminate the separation that normally exists between us. It would eliminate barriers and boundaries and all of it. Wouldn't matter what the differences were as long as we see each other with the eye of oneness. So that's one major thing that can really help any one of us. The other thing.
Well, Robert, as always, time has flown, and I'm afraid we're out of it. I can't thank you enough for being on the show.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
Our guest this hour has been Robert Atkinson, the author of 9 books, including the 2017 Nautilus Book Award winner, The Story of Our Time, From Duality to Interconnectedness to Oneness. His website, robertatkinson.net. Remember to join our email family to stay abreast of all the exciting new things we have coming up at missionevolution.org. This has been Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka on the X Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net. Join us next time as the mission continues, bringing information, resources, and support to an evolving world.